Testing, testing. Okay, back on the record for case 9666. Let me deal with one preliminary matter before we start with the witnesses.
Good morning, Your Honors and Commissioners. David Shapiro from MEA, Maryland Energy Administration. I'm here with Ryan Opsel and Sam Byrne. I'm entering my appearance.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Fields.
Yes, OPC calls Maximilian Chang.
Actually, let me...
Yeah, you sworn in?
Yeah.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm under penalties of perjury that the statements made in this matter today are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name, spell your first and last name, and give us your business address.
My name is Maximilian Chang, M-A-X-I-M-I-L-I-A-N, Chang, C-H-A-N-G. I am the founder of Zoid Energy, Z-O-O-I-D-E-N-E-R-G-Y. My business address is 11 South Angel Street, number 411, Providence, Rhode Island, 02906.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. Could you move the microphone over a little bit? There we go. Thank you. Mr. Chang, do you have in front with you a document entitled Direct Testimony of Maximilian P. Chang on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel dated October 7, 2024?
I do.
And does that document consist of 35 pages of questions and answers and 2 attachments?
It does.
And was it filed with a confidential and public version?
That's correct.
Thank you. Do you have any corrections to that testimony you'd like to go over at this time?
I do. There are 4 typos. The first instance is on page 7, line 7. It should be 8,500 megawatts instead of 8,300. That typo also occurs on page 32, line 19. And then it occurs on page 35, lines 12 and 13.
Okay, so I'm just so I'm straight. So, I see. Page 32, and then what was the
Page
last?
35. Sorry, I shortchanged the
Sure.
targets.
Did that, so that's the target for Maryland offshore wind. Did that impact your analysis in any way?
No.
With that, Mr. Chang, was this testimony prepared by you or under your direct supervision?
It was.
If these questions were asked again today, would your answers be the same?
They would be.
And do you adopt this here as your testimony here today?
I do.
Your Honor, I'd like to mark that exhibit as OPC Exhibit 2 for the public version, and the confidential version is OPC Exhibit 2C, and move that it be admitted into the record.
No objections. So admitted.
With that, Mr. Chang is available for cross-examination.
So, let me start. Sierra Club,
No questions.
Earth Justice,
No questions.
U.S. Wind,
No questions, thank you.
staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chang. I'm Michael Dean on behalf of staff, and I'll have a data request to provide. Do you have a copy of the OPC response to staff data request number 1?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Chang, was this document prepared by you or under your supervision?
It was.
Do you have any corrections or changes to the responses that you provided to these questions?
Not at this time.
Thank you. Staff would like to mark this as staff exhibit number 6,
Okay, so Mark?
and staff would like to move it into the administrative record.
No objection.
Actually, I think,
Staff has no further questions.
no, actually, I want to make sure that, you okay?
Yes, I was actually just checking to make sure that there's nothing confidential.
No, I understand, so,
I don't think there is.
okay,
No objection.
okay, so admit it.
Staff has no further questions at this time.
Alrighty, Commissioner Sussman.
Morning, Mr. Chang. Thank you for your testimony. If we could turn to page 4 of your testimony, in your summary of recommendations and adjustments, you talk about certain aspects of the analysis that are not reasonable. Can you just sort of go in, sort of generally, what were your concerns?
So,
Without going into
Right, yeah, so-
the specifics of the confidential information.
Yes, I
But,
can.
but actually, if it gets to a point where you need to say something that's confidential, just pause and let us know so we can turn the camera off.
Okay.
So otherwise,
Yeah,
we're fine.
Yeah, I'm hoping you're going to be able
Yeah,
to
yeah.
do this without going into.
Yeah,
the,
I will try to keep
Okay.
specific numbers out of my responses.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Okay. Just to make sure, you would like to meet for me to explain sort of at a very high level.
Very high level. I mean, there's the applicant has asked for a certain level of OREX, and you're asking that we reduce the number, or the dollar number.
That's correct.
And so if you could just go into sort of general terms, why you recommend that we reduce that number.
Sure. So the methodology that U.S. Wind adopted for this proceeding is to quantify the energy price impacts is based on a regression methodology that was also used by Skipjack in the previous round 2 application. What that regression methodology does is it basically they came up with a regression formula based on sort of the observation of historical prices, historical demand, and then made a mathematical formula. And so based on that mathematical formula, that sort of creates a delta in the sort of the quantity of offshore wind, and that's a sort of percentage reduction off of sort of energy prices without the project. And so that regression, that sort of amount of dollars that they've calculated, they assume that effect sort of lasts in perpetuity for the project. What I have done is, if that regression methodology is acceptable to the commission, there are certain adjustments that I made to sort of account for how once that effect is in place, the market responds to this sort of zero cost resource. Prices may decrease, but then other market responders, other generators may decide to sort of delay new projects, or because prices have gone down, there's an increase in demand. So I think Mr. Repsher touched on this in his testimony yesterday, sort of their countervailing forces. What I'm trying to do in my adjustments is to quantify those countervailing forces. And so my first adjustment is sort of the phase-in of this effect. So in my testimony, I talked about how there are existing SOS contracts, and those contracts are fixed. And so as those contracts expire, they are then sort of reset at the new prices. And so that would include the effect of this of the U.S. wind projects. So I have a phase-in for that. My other adjustment is I have an extrapolation growth rate. So this is post 2040 and sort of the last uh, 5 years of the analysis. They assumed a growth rate based on the PJM forecast, and they've just sort of extrapolated the last 5 years of the PJM forecast. I've adjusted my growth rate to be the Brattle Group's electrification scenario that Brattle did for the commission back in December 2023, and I've used that as my extrapolated growth rate. So that's the second adjustment. My third adjustment.
Can you just, so in terms of electrification, the Brattle Group projected a lower electrification growth? Is that the, so is PJM projecting higher growth in electrification?
So this is the extrapolated growth. So this is really just taking the average. What PA Consulting did was they took the average of the last 5 years of the PJM load forecast. So that is sort of embedded growth.
Okay, the last 5 years would be from
2035 through 2039.
Okay.
And so they took the average of that number and said, in 2040, we'll use the same growth rate. And so I've just taken the Brattle Group growth rate, which I think goes up till 2031, and said in 2040, there's still going to be electrification. I don't know how much that electrification is going to be. Is it going to be new technologies? And so to be just to capture sort of other factors, I used a higher electrification growth rate that Brattle had produced. So I think in their high electrification with existing technologies, it was 0.9%, which is what I used. I think they also had a scenario which I believe was electrification with emerging technologies, which I think was a more aggressive sort of electrification scenario, and they said that was, I think, 0.6%. So I just chose the 0.9% as my extrapolated growth rate.
Okay, and without getting into the specific number values, how different is your calculated OREC recommendations than the applicants? Are we talking about a high percentage of difference, or are we talking about sort of marginal differences?
It is. I can give the percentage number, but I don't know if that's confidential or not. I want to be clear. The difference in my OREC price versus the applicant's OREC price.
Could you point to something in your testimony?
I can point to sort of.
If I may, with confidentiality, if he just were to say that my projection is X percent lower than their projection, I don't think that would.
That would do.
Okay, my adjusted OREC price is about 14% lower than the applicant's OREC price.
Okay. Okay. But you're projecting in calculating your OREC price, you're assuming higher electrification growth than what the applicant is assuming. Is that right?
I think that's a question of so the company's response to, I believe, OPC 9-4. I think I asked them I asked them a series of questions about sort of PJM's embedded electrification, and they didn't. The applicants they didn't quantify something specific to Maryland. They just took what was embedded in the PJM load forecast. So I'm using a number that was developed for Maryland specifically. I don't know if that number was actually incorporated into the PJM load forecast specifically.
Okay, and in terms of that difference between Brattle and PJM, how much of an impact did that have on your analysis?
So, if I actually think that bear with me, Commissioner. I'm just trying to find the
Oh, that's fine.
table. So if you look at Table 4, it's on page 21 of my testimony.
Okay.
So Table 4 shows only using the 0.9% growth rate, the Brattle growth rate. That's the only thing I changed in the ratepayer impact model. If I use that instead of the 1.6%, that shows sort of the difference within the rate impact model, what that effect would be. So it would pass on the in round 1, it would pass the residential impact test, but fail the non-residential. In round 2, it would fail the residential, but pass on the non-residential.
Okay, so I guess I'm asking, so what you testified earlier is that your ORIC number is about 13% lower than the applicant's ORIC request. And I'm trying to get a sense of how much that, of the 13% reflects the differences in electrification numbers, sort of looking out into the future.
So it would be, I'd have to, what I could do is I could create sort of a bar chart that shows the components. I didn't do that in this analysis.
Well, as it is, do you think about half of that 13%, or is it 3/4 of the 13%?
I would say that this effect is probably of my 3 adjustments. I didn't get a chance to talk about the last adjustment.
Right.
But so I'll get back to that. But of the 3 adjustments, I think this one is probably, if I was to guess, it would probably be subject to check. It would probably be 1/4 of the adjustments.
Okay. So the third adjustment is
The decay and duration. And so basically that is, that's sort of a catch-all, if you will, of how the market would respond to this project. So presumably, at some point, as I said earlier, the market would respond either by delaying new additions, or there would be an increased demand. And so I used a 3% decay factor. As I mentioned in my testimony, in 2015, Exeter Associates did sort of a duration analysis for the Empower Maryland program, and they recommended a 20% decay, which I just for illustrative purposes, I did that analysis in my testimony, but I chose a 3% decay in my analysis.
okay. So of the 3 factors, so electrification about 1/4, reflected in 1/4 of the difference between the ORIC proposals. Decay,
Decay, I think, is about 65%.
60. So most of the difference in ORIC proposals is reflected in that 3% decay.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. That's all I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Richard.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Barbe.
Yeah, I have a few questions. So I didn't quite catch whether your estimate is higher or lower than U.S. winds.
So,
Because it has to be one or the other.
yes. So if you make my adjustments without changing the U.S. wind OREC prices, my adjustments would make their rate impacts much higher.
No. I want to know first whether your estimate for electric demand is higher or lower.
Oh, so for the first 15 years of the rate impact analysis, I am using the same electric load assumptions that U.S. Wind is using. So the last the last sort of 5 years, my extrapolated growth rate is lower than U.S. winds. So overall, yes, my growth rate is lower over the 20 years versus U.S. wind.
Okay, and I understand you said that you use the Brattle analysis to get these numbers, I presume?
For the post 2040 extrapolated growth rate, that is correct.
Okay. Now, as you know, the technology and recent economic trends are moving very, very quickly, and in particular, this governor and this legislature are interested in the data center industry. So to what extent is that incorporated into these load estimates?
So to the extent that the PJM load forecasts have sort of incorporated that for the first 15 years, then yes, it is the exact same. To the extent that there are other aspects of load growth that occur within the PJM forecast in the first 15 years, neither my analysis or the U.S. wind analysis captures that specifically. In post 2040, which is what we're talking about in sort of the growth rates, there could be better efficiencies. There could be demand response of data centers. There could be other technologies. It could be behind the meter. There are lots of factors that I don't know 15 years from now.
Okay. And this is purely for my education. I'm not familiar with this concept of decay. Maybe I'm familiar with it under a different name. Would you just explain to me what that concept is?
Sure. So at a high level, as I mentioned to Commissioner Suchman, decay is so if you think about sort of supply and demand, they intersect. So I can talk about it better in DRIPE, sort of demand effects.
I'm familiar with micro and macroeconomic curves. Go ahead.
If you shift the demand curve without shifting the supply curve, you get a slightly different intersection point.
Right.
If you shift it downwards, it moves it towards the left of the supply curve and you get a different price. Likewise, if you shift the supply curve downwards, but leave the demand the same, it sort of shifts downwards and prices decrease. The decay effect is...
Wait, you're saying if supply curve goes downward, that would increase prices, wouldn't it?
If the
demand curve stays the same.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
We're keeping... You're shifting one curve but leaving the other one constant.
So remind me again, which curve are we shifting and which are we keeping constant?
The application shifts the supply curve downward.
The application for offshore winds shifts the supply curve downward?
And for their regression analysis, that's what they sort of.
I would think that. Okay, so you're defining decay as an effect of reducing supply?
No, so that's the first point. The decay is at some point when you make these shifts, the market will respond, and so the decay is how the curves respond to get back to either to get back to equilibrium or to get back to some point that is slightly below the equilibrium, which is where it was beforehand.
Okay. All right. So let me ask another 40,000 foot question here. So I would think that an increase, you know what, let me just ask you the question. If demand increases more than we expect it to, what effect would that have on price?
At a theoretical level, if all things being equal, if you increase demand and you leave supply the same, that would increase prices.
Okay. All right, I agree with that. Uh, I guess I'm having talk through talk through with me the reasons why the increased estimate of demand after year 15, right?
Yes.
Okay. Talk through with me why that would have the result. Oh, I guess what you're saying is that the increase in demand after year 15 is going to cause market prices to go up, and so therefore we have to limit the OREX. Is that what you're arguing?
Um, so, to answer your question, sort of based on what the U.S. wind ratepayer impact model does,
Uh-huh.
maybe so. I hear your question. I sort of answer it sort of in a roundabout manner.
Yeah, that's fine.
What they did, so because I use a lower energy growth factor than they did, what they did in their model was they have sort of a Maryland energy growth number, and so they sort of extrapolate that out over the 20-year period, and then they sort of discount that back to sort of quantify the ratepayer impacts. So what I've done, so that's their denominator. So what I've done is, because I have a lower growth rate, my denominator is smaller than their denominator. So when you do the rate impact, that's why my rate impact is higher than their numbers.
Okay. By the way, out of curiosity, what rate do you use as a discount rate in your analysis?
I think that's confidential. It's
Okay.
it's the same discount rate that they used.
Same as U.S. wind.
Yes, I didn't
Okay.
change anything.
Okay, that's really what I wanted to
Yep.
know. I think that's it for me for now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So, U.S. Wind's expert in this field who testified yesterday, in his rebuttal testimony, states that the use of this decay function isn't appropriate for this analysis. And that's why he didn't include it in their model. So I guess explain to me why you think it should be in there.
Well, I think no decay is unreasonable, because if this project were to come online, I think it would be unreasonable that other generators would not respond to this project. So therefore, I think zero decay is inappropriate. I think a decay is appropriate because if this project is approved and comes online, there are going to be all the other market participants, both supply and demand, will see this project. Prices may come down. That may delay new additions, or in the case where if there is an increased demand, and this project comes online, the demand may result in units that would have retired. They may choose to delay retiring, so prices may sort of adjust. So the decay is sort of an overall market response to this dynamic situation.
Now, was your analysis based on the PJM projections of demand sort of as standard operating process that we've been going through the last couple of years? Because it seems now we're in this new regime where, PJM is concerned about data centers popping up here, there, everywhere, and having this consequential impact on demand throughout the grid.
To the extent that no, I did not explicitly sort of factor in like how specific load is going to grow or how markets are going to respond specifically. In a sense, that's why I recommended in my testimony that you, the commission, convene sort of a process to standardize this methodology. I think for this proceeding, it is important. I think for the next 6,800 megawatts of offshore wind that in order to meet the 8,500 megawatt goal, if other proponents come in and propose a regression methodology, I think having a standardized methodology that may be updated as needed, I think is important. Because, I mean, what we're talking about is it's very sort of, it's theoretical. It is, I think, having different perspectives on this issue is important to come up with sort of a consensus number. So, yes, I think it's important to have all of those factors sort of included into sort of a decay function that's standardized by the commission.
So, I guess one of the problems that we have in this thing is we've now got a lot of different moving parts. So not only do we have this project, which, you know, is planned to get built, but there's, you know, any number of offshore wind projects projected to be built up and down the eastern seaboard. You know, so now New York, Massachusetts, all these other states are very much into the game. And like, if I remember right, you did make some mention or some recommendation that we factor in, you know, sort of trying a way to integrate all those projects through the transmission process. And then on the other hand, we got this, you know, what seems to be brand new, significant amounts of demand from the data center and the AI industry that everybody thinks is now going to, you know, gobble up all the electricity and cause impacts on that. And so we're being urged to think about how to respond to that. So I guess I'm trying to understand how we sort of, you know, at this point in time, figure out all these things that are kind of in the works but not here yet. So
It's an exciting time.
that's for sure. So.
It is incredibly challenging. I hear you. I wish I had a simple answer for you, but it is going to be a process. And you're absolutely right. What you do in this proceeding will have impacts on, you know, the sort of the data, or and vice versa, the data center issues that you're looking at in PC 61. And then I believe under the Powers Act, you're required to sort of coordinate with other states on transmission issues. The coordination on transmission issues may actually have an impact on this proceeding, because if there is a sort of a cooperative transmission solution that may sort of reduce transmission costs on this one. I mean, but then there's also the whole PJM interconnection queue, which I think everyone would agree is a mess right now. And so that has bearings on this proceeding. And so absolutely, there is no simple solution, but they're all sort of related. And likewise, I know Delaware is sort of proceeding on procuring offshore wind, so there are opportunities to collaborate with Delaware. Virginia is moving ahead with the CVOW, and I think in their most recent IRP, they've talked about adding another 3 gigawatts. New Jersey is proceeding with its offshore wind procurement schedule. And then within Maryland, you have Equinor sort of investing in Ørsted, and so maybe an Equinor Ørsted bid would come up. I mean, I think to bring back to the point that in this proceeding, I mean, in the last 2 proceedings, because you had 2 developers coming in simultaneously. I think one of the benefits of that, and I talked about this in the 9431 case proceeding, I think with Commissioner Richard, was sort of the benefit of competition. Unfortunately, right now in this proceeding, there's only one developer, and that developer has no incentive to sort of give you its best and final offer price, which what they did the last two times.
So I guess one of the messages I got yesterday from various witnesses for U.S. Wind is this, they're attempting to try and thread this needle to make this project work, and it's pretty financially difficult, given all the stuff that's within their control and a lot of stuff that's not within their control. And so they needed flexibility as far as, their ability to finance this project and sign contracts and things like that. And a big piece of that, I mean, there was other things that they said, look, changing the MBE requirement could have cause some issues, but the bottom line seemed to be getting the right price for the OREC was the key factor in their ability to go forward with this. And as Commissioner Barve mentioned, the state at least seems to views this as a big piece of the generation puzzle going forward, as a way of trying to get a significant sized renewable energy project, operating and supplying electricity in Maryland. So I guess the question I got is, as we're weighing the inferences here, do we, since your suggestion is not a huge decrease, I mean, is it a great error on our part to sort of err on the side of an upside to make sure this project happens?
Well, that's why you guys get paid the big bucks. So, I mean, that's a terrific question. Certainly, I think there are avenues for the developer. Certainly, they are pursuing the ITC credits, getting the full amount. That will help them. And I think the state should sort of assist them to the extent that the state can in ensuring that they get the ITC credits. It's my understanding that I think I have a DR to the company subject to check, that they have submitted a application for loan guarantees. If to the extent that the state can help that application for them, that would sort of help the economics of their project. But I also want to caution that getting the adjustments correct is also important, because ultimately ratepayers are bearing the cost of this project. And if you approve this project with incorrect adjustments, you may have it. Well, in fact, it will be the rate. It will not pass the rate impact test. What you may end up having is you may approve this project, but the next 6,800 megawatts will be that much more difficult, because actually, as also one of my recommendations also is to ask other future developers to do a cumulative rate impact of offshore wind, because if the cost burden to ratepayers reaches a point where ratepayers may just sort of rebel to these projects. So that wouldn't do the state any good to meet its targets if ratepayers are willing to sort of fund these projects going forward.
Okay. Oh, actually.
Yeah, I remember a couple of questions I wanted to ask. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, again, up at 40,000 feet. I have to tell you that I'm just very uncomfortable with basing policy decisions on estimates that are 5 or 10 years in the future, notwithstanding 15 years into the future. So to kind of do a riff on the chairman's question, should we be nickel and diming U.S. wind based on an estimate for 15 years into the future? Because I have real difficulty believing that anyone in this room or anywhere on the planet knows what's going to happen in 15 years.
I mean, I've, so I believe that my extrapolation growth rate in 2040 is reasonable.
Mhm.
That said, I've also structured the testimony and the analysis so that if you choose not to accept that, you can parse that out. And you can sort of readjust the OREC prices without that one sort of factor included. So that is always an option that that's your prerogative as commissioners. You can choose to accept all, none, or some of my adjustments.
I guess if you look at it like in the guise of game theory, I'm flipping a coin, and heads, your estimate is correct, and tails, U.S. wind's estimate is correct. So given the fact that it's a coin flip, because it truly is, what's the best way for us to proceed?
Well, since, as I said before, since U.S. Wind is not giving a best and final offer in this proceeding like they did last proceeding, one option is you can sort of make some adjustments and say, and actually, I think as the commission you did that in the 9431 proceeding. I think the final price that the commission offered was not quite the same number as the best and final offers from U.S. Wind and Skipjack. And so you as a commission can say, here's the OREC price that we're willing to give you. We will sort of assist you on the things that I mentioned, the ITC and the loan guarantees to sort of help make this project potentially more financially viable, and see what happens.
Okay, that's it for me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may we have a brief redirect?
Actually, we don't do that. So.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you.
Actually, so.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And after listening to a little bit, I do have a question. You mentioned that about the best and final offer. You do in your testimony talk about the U.S. Wind's commitment to sharing or returning any savings from future transmission, I guess, maybe improved processes or other types of, I guess, incentives in transmission. Is that correct? Is that
Yes.
your testimony? And I guess that's because that is a significant driver then in some of the your future cost estimates. Is that correct? How you arrive at the ratepayer impact? That at this point there's an assumption that in the current price, the OREC price, there is the current transmission planning system and other incentives.
Well, to the extent that, so my adjusted OREC price was made to pass the rate impact test. So to the extent that
Making a number of assumptions
yeah,
for the future.
Right. Absolutely. To the extent that the U.S. Wind original OREC price makes those assumptions, that is embedded in my numbers.
Okay. But as far as this being a last and final offer, it may not be. There may be some improvements to the transmission planning process in the future, the interconnection process that may reduce cost. Is that a reasonable, again, possible scenario?
So I want to be careful because I may be incorrect, but I am under the impression that once you approve the OREC price, that is the OREC price. So I don't know how the savings actually would flow through to ratepayers. I don't know if that's sort of a reduction in the OREC price or if that's sort of a credit. But I just don't know how the
The
mechanism
process.
will,
And I don't know if that's actually been determined. It's just a commitment
Yeah.
that was made. That's my understanding in the previous order, and it's what my understanding is. U.S. Wind has committed to us.
Yes, that's my understanding as
Okay.
well. I just don't know what the mechanism of that flow through.
Okay, and I'm not sure. Maybe that's something for us to check into what that mechanism is. But I just wanted to again. I kind of agreed with Commissioner Barve that there could be some significant changes in the future that would impact, these, I guess the calculations made on the ratepayer impact. And I just want to be careful that we don't get overly precise at this point when there's a lot of imprecision, I guess, in what we know about the future.
Yes, that would be correct. But likewise, there's no guarantee that there would be cost savings either. So
Okay. Well, I think there's some hope that
There is
maybe there's hope in, again, FERC Order 1920 and FERC Order 1923, again, how the process will work in the future and how we might look at, our PGM would plan for transmission and perhaps, again, with the mechanism of looking at any possible future savings. That is something that I think I'm considering also. So thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I have a few redirect questions.
Actually, we don't do that either, so you don't get a chance to redirect the questions that we ask. So I understand that used to be the process, but we haven't done that for the last year. So okay, thank you very much. Okay, so now we're turning to Maryland Energy Administration, and again, need one of you two to.
I could go from here.
No, actually, we'll let you. We'll find you a seat. So don't worry.
Fine.
So Maryland Energy Administration would call Dr. Ryan Opsel to the stand.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm under penalties of perjury that the statements made in this matter today are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name, spell your first name and last name, and give us your business address.
It's Ryan Opsal, RyanOpsal, 1800 Washington Boulevard, Baltimore, Maryland, 21230.
Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Opsel. Do you have one 23-page document in front of you titled Direct Testimony of Ryan Opsal, PhD, on behalf of the Maryland Energy Administration, public version, October 7th, 2024?
I do.
And that document, excuse me, is 23 pages?
So I believe that is a correction to make. It should be 24 pages.
Well, this is the
There was-
public
Oh.
version.
I only have the confidential.
Okay. In the confidential version, so you have a document titled Direct Testimony of Ryan Opsal, PhD, on behalf of the Maryland Energy Administration, confidential version.
I do.
And how many pages is that document?
24.
Okay. Do you have any other corrections to make to that document?
Nope.
Chair, I would like the direct testimony of Ryan Opsal public version marked as MEA's Exhibit 1. And I believe how we've been doing it is the confidential version to be marked as 1C for identification.
So Mark,
Dr. Opsal, were these documents, one of which you have in front of you, but they are identical except for the confidentiality, prepared by you or under your direct supervision?
Yes.
And besides the change that you've already discussed, are there any other changes or amendments to these documents?
No.
If you were asked the questions in these documents today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
And do you adopt this as your testimony today?
Yes.
And Chair, I would ask that these be admitted as MEA's Exhibits 1 and 1C.
So admitted.
And Dr. Opsahl is now available for cross.
So it was Sierra Club.
No questions, thank you.
Earth Justice.
No questions. No questions.
OPC applicant.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Opsahl. I'm Carvel Collins, counsel for U.S. Wind.
Morning.
Thank you for being here. Wonder if I may ask you to turn to page 22 of your testimony.
Okay.
At the top of the page there in lines 1 through 3, MEA recommends that U.S. Wind shall use reasonable commercial efforts to ensure that its O&M vessels are zero-emission vessels. Is that correct?
Correct.
Did you have an opportunity to review U.S. Wind's response to your recommendation contained in Mr. Grabowski's rebuttal testimony?
I believe I did review it at some point. I believe the response, correct me if I'm wrong, was something along the lines of it's still very difficult to acquire these types of vessels. Yep.
Yes. It's at page 8 of his rebuttal testimony. He notes that U.S. Wind would not oppose your recommendation if the wording was somewhat modified. If you had an opportunity to look at that modified wording, what I want to ask you is, would this be acceptable to MEA? And I'm happy to read that modified language to you if you
could
like.
you please? Yeah.
The suggested language that we counter with is understanding that zero-emission O&M vessels are a commercially immature option, and that availability for the project may not be possible for commercial, technical, or safety reasons. U.S. Wind will use commercially reasonable efforts to ensure that its O&M vessels are zero emission.
Yeah, I think we find that acceptable. Yeah.
Thank you. No further questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Opsahl.
Staff.
Good morning, Dr. Opsahl. Staff has no questions for you today.
Any redirect?
No.
Commissioner Richard.
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Barbeck.
No questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Sussman.
Yes, good morning, Dr. Offsall. I have a couple of questions. So in your testimony, you had recommended that we require U.S. Wind to provide a $5 million application deposit into an escrow account to cover, to reimburse the state for any cost to review the round 2 application. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and have you spoken to U.S. Wind about this proposal?
We have not.
Okay, so you don't know what U.S. Wind's position is on this $5 million application deposit?
Not outside of what has been presented in these proceedings.
Okay, and this would reflect MEA's costs for reviewing $5 million?
No, Commissioner. So that is meant to basically reimburse the state. So any state agency that has expended any resources, personnel, hours worked, consulting fees, anything to assist in these proceedings, that is what it is meant to reimburse, not just MEA.
Okay, so that would be over and above the decommissioning plan. So there's a decommissioning plan with a bond. This would be to the extent that something were to happen and the project gets canceled, or would this also include the federal court finding that BOEM violated federal law? That would also, that the $5 million deposit would also be provided to the state?
So I would suggest not. Really, the intent behind that amount is if a company decides to makes the decision to withdraw. So think Ørsted withdrawing from their OREX or withdrawing from other projects. That's primarily what it's intended to do. Like if you are a company and the state goes through all of this this long process, expends a lot of resources. If you then decide that the project is not economically feasible, that's fine, but we would at least like to be reimbursed for certain costs incurred.
Yeah, the concern I have is that, so we could take a federal court finding that BOEM violated federal law off the table. But I mean, there's a whole gradation of reasons why U.S. Wind would need to abandon the project. So, federal court saying you can't do it means that the company would abandon the project. But if the court were to impose conditions that are so onerous that the company couldn't meet those conditions, would that also relieve them of the loss of the $5 million in escrow?
I would suggest yes, because those court proceedings, in my mind anyway, would be outside of the company's control.
Okay, so what you would want is to have it, decisions made by the company that are solely within their control.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, but then, other things could happen. Price of steel could go through the roof because of tariffs imposed on that. Would the company then, okay, you understand my concern.
Yes,
It's very,
that's
it may be
fair.
hard for us to draft this in a way
Yes.
that takes care of your concern, because I understand your concern is that you don't want them to just leave for whatever reason, but there may be circumstances that sort of would require that they leave, and that maybe it would be unfair to then penalize them a further $5 million because of that.
Oh, correct. I fully understand your concerns, Commissioner.
Right. I wonder if you have a position on, so you heard us, I assume, speaking with Mr. Chang about OPC's recommendation that the ORIC price be reduced. Do you have a position, does MEA have a position on what the commission should do in terms of the dollar amount of the ORIC price?
We do not retain an economic consultant right now for these proceedings, so I would have to say no, we do not have a position.
Okay. All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, so on page 21 of your testimony, you discuss this proposed increase in the MBE requirement. And in discussing this with U.S. Wind yesterday, their concern was that if the increase in the MBE requirement came with a penalty or a fine or something like that, that would cause more financial uncertainty for them and just cause more difficulty. I know you're not an MBE expert, but is that how this process works? I mean, is it directly connected to a fine, or is it more just aspirational to get to this?
So there technically would be a penalty if they were to fall short in here. So number 3 asks for a conversion from a percent to a dollar amount. So if they were to fall short on that dollar amount, then that difference would be then sent to a fund, something like the I'm sorry, we have in here, so like Department of Commerce, the Governor's Office of Small Minority Businesswoman, Business Affairs, any fund like that to actually help MBE businesses. So it would basically be redirected there to assist with those efforts. So technically they are correct. Yes, there would be a penalty of sorts.
And I guess, so regarding this conversion that you want to do, I mean, I guess again, I'm not as familiar with that concept. I mean, my view is, and based on the program that we run here, is that, we have a goal for the utilities to spend a certain amount of money and hire a certain percentage of the people that they contract with and things like that. But I guess I'm not aware that that program is actually tied to a specific dollar amount.
So you start with the percentage. The dollar amount is basically just to calculate what the difference is between the required amount and the missed amount, basically.
So if we up the percentage, though, I mean, are we actually required to make this conversion that you're suggesting, or is that?
I'd say it's purely just to make the calculation. So if we were to, I mean, you could even keep the amount, let's say the same, and you would still need to convert it to a dollar amount in order to get that difference. Yeah.
All right, so that's sort of more a demonstration on your part about what this is worth in the scheme of things.
Well, I mean, it's these goals are important to us, to the agency, and to the administration. And I think if we see any areas where we can push a little bit to try and get more, I think we'd like to try and take that opportunity. And look, this is not. I fully understand the difficulties in sourcing MBE at times, but it is our understanding that U.S. Wind is able to already meet the 15% goal, and I understand it's a goal, and it's obviously not required at this point. But it is our understanding that they're able to meet that. So our thinking was, why not try to push a little bit more? And now, to also suggest the 25% stretch goal as on top of that.
And did you develop this recommendation in conjunction with the relevant state agencies that actually are directly involved in this area, or?
We do not.
So, so it was just sort of internal thinking within the agency?
Yes.
Okay. But it was based on the fact that the state as a whole has been trying to move in that direction when it comes to.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Oh, wait a minute. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I did make a note in my about an issue he raised in your testimony. I would put this in the category of the residency requirement. It's on page 22 in the calculation of net positive economic benefits to the state. Do I understand you're proposing to, I guess, strike or and perform work in the state of Maryland? So you would impose a strict Maryland state residency requirement for calculation of net benefits to the state?
Yes.
Okay. Can I ask just to read? Maybe ask this way: did you talk to your counterparts in Delaware about this change?
We did not.
Did not. Okay. I often hear from our counterparts in Delaware that they would like to be, I guess, more collaborative and are concerned about being left out. Is understanding that we are kind of literally tied at the hip here with Delaware for this project specifically, with bringing in the power into Indian River. Is this something that you considered? I mean, the fact that again our projects and potentially the expansion of again once again into the wind energy area right off Delaware again does I guess involve the state of Delaware very closely.
So I think that's an excellent point. Like I said, we did not consult Delaware on this particular issue, but you're absolutely right. I mean, any of our neighbors, any of our geographic neighbors are very important with this. Not even just this particular project, but anything involving the infrastructure and transmission that's involved, that I know you're also very heavily involved in as well, Commissioner. Yeah, I mean, look, we remain open to any cooperation with any of our surrounding states,
Okay.
and we certainly have certainly we could do better, but certainly have strived to do that as much as possible.
Okay, yeah, and you mentioned and again with New Jersey, with the state agreement approach, the idea that we might work with them on transmission, and we have an agreement with, I think, North Carolina. I can't remember if Virginia's there as well.
North Carolina and Virginia, yes.
I guess I just
Yeah.
would want to be very careful here as we, try to build these collaborations, and then have something in here that might not sound so friendly. So okay.
Understood.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, I'd like to follow.
Yeah, on that, I completely missed that about residency requirements. What happens where you have two people who are married and one spouse is works for a local government in Delaware or Northern Virginia, and the other one is then required to have residency in the state of Maryland? Should we, in that case, have an exception? I've asked this question on the floor of the House many times.
I can't say I have thought it through that much, but
Yes, you are in line with all the committee chairs that I asked this question of. Thank you very much.
Let me ask one follow-up then on that. So, one of the proposed facilities is this Ocean City project, and I mean, I don't come from that part of the state, but I come from the other part of the state, and there's a lot of situations where the job may be in Maryland, but people from West Virginia and Pennsylvania are employed there because literally the border is within spitting distance. And I suspect the same thing's true in Ocean City relative to Delaware, that lots of folks that work in Ocean City, probably wind up living in Delaware and vice versa. So, I mean, do we call along the lines of what Commissioner Richard was talking about? Does it kind of create more problems than it actually solves, trying to limit the employment that they have, just the Maryland residents?
I mean, look, there is certainly the potential for that, but our general intent, of course, is to try and drive as much job growth for the state as possible.
Okay, all right. Fair enough then. All right, thank you very much. So I guess we're moving on to staff, so.
Thank you, Your Honor. Staff would like to call witness Anson Justy.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm under penalties of perjury that the statements made in this matter today are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please state your name, spell your first and last name, and give us your business address.
My name is Anson Justy, ANSON JUSTI. My business address is 6 St. Paul Street, Baltimore, Maryland.
Thank you.
Your Honor, as a preliminary matter, staff filed corrected versions of the testimony yesterday. The correction is to list public version and confidential version on the cover page. And that was the only change.
Why don't you just tell me what the change was?
Adding public version
I see.
and confidential version on the cover
I
sheet.
see. Okay, all right.
Mr. Justy, do you have before you a document entitled The Direct Testimony and Exhibits Public Version of Anson Justy, dated October 7, 2024, consisting of 21 pages in an exhibit?
I have the confidential version.
In that case, do you also have the confidential version of this document with the same number of pages?
Yes.
And the public version is just the same as the confidential version with redactions?
Yes.
Were these documents prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to these documents?
No.
And if asked the same questions, your testimony today would be the same?
Yes.
Your Honor, staff would like to mark the public version of the testimony as staff exhibit number 7 and the confidential version as staff exhibit number 7C.
So marked.
And staff would like to move these two documents into the administrative record.
So admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. The witness is available for cross-examination.
Sierra Club.
No questions, thanks.
Earth Justice.
No questions.
OPC.
No questions, Your Honor.
US Wind.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Mr. Justy, thank you for your time today. To review, it's your testimony, is it not, that U.S. Wind bid passes the ratepayer analysis in Maryland?
Yes.
And you also agree that the would you also agree that PJM demand estimates as of this year and recently are escalating rapidly?
I haven't been focusing on those estimations for many years, but it coincides with what I know.
Have you spent any time thinking about electrification of the grid, data centers, and those types of things?
Yes.
Demand generally? Would you agree with me then that most electrification, data centers, and other types of demand are likely to come online after 2031, which is the end date of the 2023 Brattle report used by Mr. Chang?
I don't know if I'd agree with most, but they will be coming online, and there will be a lot of them soon, and after that too.
So there'll be a lot of them coming online after 2031 as well, correct?
I think so.
You also spent considerable time, I think, in your testimony talking about the renewable portfolio standard. Is that correct?
Yes.
For Maryland. And in writing about the renewable portfolio standard, did you have occasion to review the various laws passed by the Maryland legislature, such as the Clean Energy Jobs Act and the Promoting Offshore Wind Energy Resources Act and the Climate Solutions Now Act and the various other acts passed by the legislature in recent years relating to offshore wind energy development?
I've reviewed the ones you described. I can't say I've reviewed all of them.
Thank you. And is it your testimony that the Maryland legislature now requires 8,500 megawatts of offshore wind by 2031?
I agree.
And is it also your testimony that the 1,710 megawatts of capacity that U.S. Wind is proposing is critical to Maryland reaching that goal?
I think it's helpful for Maryland to reach that goal.
Do you think Maryland could reach that goal without the U.S. Wind project?
Your Honor, is there objection? Is friendly cross?
Actually,
whole thing is.
Given the fact that their position and U.S. Wind's position is identical, I am concerned about that. So.
Okay. May I ask a different question?
Sure.
And I don't actually know if he knows the answer to this question, so I think it should be okay. But in your review of the various laws of the Maryland legislature, did you ever come across anything that would require an applicant for a rebid in this instance to pay the Maryland Energy Administration $5 million to hold in a fund in case the project is not completed?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. And only because you're staff's witness and I thought you might know, do you know if MEA has deployed any of the $12 million it received from U.S. Wind or potentially the other $12 million from Skipjack in support of wind energy in Maryland to date?
I don't know.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Okay. Well, actually, I didn't ask MEA if they had any cross, so. Okay. Staff, any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Commissioner Barbe. Commissioner Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. I am interested in just maybe a couple of questions about the levelized cost of energy that you discuss here. For this particular study, are these numbers, and that's on page 19, I'm not looking at your confidential. Yeah, okay, 19. For wind energy projects around the world, or is this something looking just at the East Coast, or I should say maybe U.S. Offshore wind energy projects? I'm just interested to know the context.
For the Lazard levelized cost
Yes.
of energy, that's focused on the U.S.
Just U.S. Okay, and so this is just for all East Coast. Have you found that? Okay, so this is basically impacts since 2021. There has been a shifting up of those levelized costs.
I think so.
Okay, and those are probably some fairly unique circumstances, but that has been taken into consideration. The unique circumstances during those years of COVID and high inflation. Is that what your estimated reason? You think the reason is for the increase?
Yeah, for the Lazard costs, I would say that the inflation and geopolitical impacts apply across industries, though, not just in offshore wind.
Yeah, but these are lifetime costs, though, so they'll continue to change over time. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And did you find, when you're looking at this project compared to, when I say this project, that the proposal compared to, I guess, other proposals, is this pretty much in line? The numbers, I would say, the cost of this project in line with other projects on the East Coast?
So I haven't looked through the cost of other projects on the East Coast.
Okay.
Comparing it to the Lazard levelized cost, I would say the ORECs that U.S. Wind proposed are a little on the higher side of the range that they provide.
Okay. And is that in line with other projects on the East Coast? I guess you just said you didn't really take a look at how those compare.
So what I can offer is that witness Repture in his rebuttal pointed out the NYSERDA levelized, or the cost of ORECs in New York that were around 150.
Okay. Okay. So that's in line with what is being proposed, I guess, by U.S. Wind?
I think so.
Okay. All right, thank you. No other questions.
Commissioner Elizabeth.
Good morning, Mr. Justy. Thank you for your testimony. You just testified that the OREC proposal from the applicant passes the ratepayer impact analysis.
I believe so.
Okay. Did you have a chance to go through the testimony of OPC witness Maximilian Chang?
I did.
Okay. So you heard his testimony this morning about his 3 adjustments. Do you have anything to have you sort of looked through the adjustments, and do you have anything you'd like to speak about the adjustments? Maybe if you can sort of go through each one of them. Do you have a problem with the proposal? Do you think any one of them has any merit? If you can sort of go through load growth assumptions, phase-in of energy price impacts, and then decay duration of energy price impacts.
So I don't have a strong position either for or against, but I can offer some analysis on it.
Please.
So on the first adjustment, it was to reduce the extrapolated load growth starting in 2040. The U.S. wind load growth was around 1.64%, and Mr. Chang recommended 0.9%. So from the Brattle report, and I'm speaking in terms of peak load rather than kilowatt-hour sales percentage increases here.
Okay.
So in that report, the electrification with legacy technology scenario was 2.1% peak load. That might be the slower decarbonization path. The electrification with best-in-class technology scenario, that was 1.1% peak load growth per year. And the electrification with fuel backup scenario, the slowest path forward would be 0.6% going forward. So there is a little bit of a non-one-to-one relationship between kilowatt-hour sales and peak load growth, but I think it's fair enough to say we're within the realm there.
Okay, and with Maryland's push for electrification, I'm assuming we're going to see higher load growth.
Yeah, I think if we're taking as given that we're going to miss this range, I would say we miss higher.
Okay. Okay, and then the phase-in of energy price impacts?
So on the point about using the DRIPE calculations, I'm not an expert on how Empower
Can you, DRIPE is short for,
demand reduction induced price effects.
okay, thank you.
So Empower uses it, and that's the strongest argument for why this might be reasonable. I reviewed at a high level the Excel spreadsheets that go into it. I didn't find any issues with it. I know, and I know from discussions with the Empower consultant, and without quoting him, I know they were a little bit controversial when they were coming through. And I think the U.S. Wind witness also in his rebuttal went through some of the orders from that 2015 proceeding and noted some of the controversies with a little more detail. So I don't have a mathematical issue with it. I'm a little uncomfortable with applying it here because the main reason is that's what we've done. And I know it's a bit controversial.
Okay, okay. The last one, I think the witness testified that it's about 65% of the difference between his OREC proposal and the applicant's OREC proposal. So that's the decay duration of energy price impacts.
Yes, I think it was a 3% decay rate that he offered.
Right.
That would be the one that I would feel the most comfortable using. I think it's logically sound under what I know about how the SOS pricing system works.
Okay.
The 3%, what makes me a little uncomfortable with that is that it's essentially the number that works, that gets you to pass if you use that. So that might be a way to adjust in a direction.
Okay, so higher percentage would result in a fail. Is that the?
Yeah, I think it's
okay.
3.2%. If you hold all the other OPC recommendations constant, 3.2% is the line where you start to fail.
Okay, so but the idea of some reflection of decay makes some sense in doing the analysis.
I do think that's okay.
Okay.
I've noticed some conversation about how whether we should be nickel or diming U.S. Wind here going on. So that I would say that that's an important consideration
Okay,
here.
but in terms of an economic analysis, some recognition of decay does make some sense.
I think that's okay.
Okay, so then the question is, what percentage do you apply?
That I don't know.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So, is there a reason why you didn't include any analysis of decay in your recommendation?
So frankly, this is my first proceeding here.
I don't put you on the spot. I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out.
And you did a
if
fine
some-
job.
If there was some consideration within staff as to whether or not this analysis is needed for this. I mean, you just told Commissioner Sussman you think it's valid, so I guess I'm trying to wonder where in the scheme of things, staff decided not to include this as part of it.
Well, the primary purpose I was going through when writing the testimony was to get as much good information as I could in front of you and to review what was proposed. And then after that, proposing a new model is, the ambitious goal. And given the time constraints, I wasn't able to do that.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Your Honor, staff would call its next witness, Mr. Lowe.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm under the penalties of perjury that the statements made in this matter today are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please state your name, spell your first and last name, and give us your business address.
My name is Christopher Lowe, spelled CHRISTOPHER, Lowe, L-O. My business address is 6 Singapore Street, Baltimore, Maryland 21202.
Thank you.
Mr. Lowe, what is your position here at the commission?
I am the engineering with the commission.
Thank you. Do you have before you a document entitled The Direct Testimony Exhibits of Christopher Lowe, public version dated October 7, 2024?
Yes, I do.
Do you also have a version of the same document listed as the confidential version?
Yes,
Was this document prepared by you or under your supervision?
it was.
Do you have any changes or corrections to this document?
I do not.
For your testimony, do these documents constitute your testimony in this proceeding?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd like to mark these two documents, the confidential version as staff exhibit number 8C and the public version as staff exhibit number 8 listed in the as 8 and 8C on the list of exhibits.
Sure. So, Mark?
And staff would like to move these two documents into the administrative record.
So admitted.
With your permission, I'd like to ask one series of questions regarding U.S. Wind's recommendations to modify Mr. Lowe's recommended conditions.
Okay.
Mr. Lowe, are you aware of U.S. Wind witness Grabowski's recommended change to your condition?
I am aware.
And this recommended change is to, instead of filing documents on the completion of the project, to file documents on each phase of completion of the project?
Yes, I would be agreeable to revise my recommendation to account for each phase of the project.
Thank you. Staff has no additional questions here, and the witness is available for cross-examination.
Sierra Club.
No questions.
Earth Justice.
No questions.
MEA. OPC.
No questions, Your Honor.
U.S. Wind.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thanks to Mr. Dean. He took care of my first question, and thank you, Mr. Lowe, for your testimony on that point regarding reporting. Wonder if I could ask you to turn to page 3 of your testimony.
Okay.
In there, starting at lines 14, you address the legislation that passed earlier this year, House Bill 1296, and you described essentially what it did, what sort of proceeding was created, which is the proceeding that we are now in, correct?
Correct.
And are you, I assume you're generally familiar with that legislation?
Generally, yep.
Do you recall another provision in there in House Bill 1296 that specifically exempted applicants from paying a fee to the state or to a state fund as a result of receiving an OREC award?
I'm not familiar with that language in that bill.
Okay, well, maybe let me ask it a different way, if I may. You've heard testimony from the Maryland Energy Administration suggesting a $5 million deposit and escrow payment to be made by U.S. Wind in connection with this project. Does staff have a position on whether that would be an appropriate policy or not?
Personally, I don't have my view, but I would agree with the MEA.
You would agree with MEA?
Yes.
And you would agree with MEA if you would accept my earlier question that in fact there is an express exemption in House Bill 1296, which passed this year, indicating that no such payment would be made, as opposed to in rounds 1 and round 2, you would still make that your recommendation, staff's recommendation, in the face of that recent statute?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
So, any redirect?
Just one question. Mr. Lowe, did you focus on the financial aspects of the project in developing your testimony?
No, I did not.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Fleshman?
So, Mr. Lowe, I understand that perhaps you hadn't thought about the $5 million bond in escrow before you sat down here today. Have you spoken with your colleagues and staff about requiring the $5 million be placed in escrow as a condition for receiving OREC?
I did not.
Okay, so this is just
Just
you now, but it's not, but it's not something that you had spoken to your counsel or to anybody within staff.
no.
So, based on that, is that? I mean, it's important for us to kind of know where the parties stand. Is that a staff position, or is that something that you believe is the right approach to take?
Oh. Well, I cannot speak for staff, so I guess it's not staff position.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Richard?
And since you're here, I thought I'd just ask this question. I should have looked this up before. But when I'm looking at your recommendations, essentially you want to require the company to do what it's going to have to do anyway, but just to file that information with us, and that is on the ISA and the CSA.
Correct.
Then there's the reporting requirement, to satisfy the COMAR 20.61.06, 0.29D through N. Just generally, what are those requirements? What is intended to accomplish with getting this information?
Well, similar to the previous proceeding, and I think U.S. Wind required to file their progress report,
Yeah.
and we want to look at their milestone, where they're at in terms of the progress, and for example, what kind of turbine selection
Okay.
they'll be, using, and things like that. So I think it's very important to satisfy this COMAR requirements.
Okay, and we had a little discussion earlier about the commitment by U.S. Wind. Should there be savings down the road from any incentives that might be offered by state or federal government, or just other savings from just the process? Is that type of information that would be captured in these reports, or I'm just curious. We never really did, I guess, have necessarily a mechanism at this point for how any savings would be realized by ratepayers, but I'm just interested to know the connection.
I would think that progress report will include those kind of information, any additional information or material that we need to be informed. Yes, I would say yes.
Okay, and just to ask, have staff given any consideration how any savings might be considered, and as far as to benefit ratepayers?
I haven't thought of that.
No is a fine answer if you don't have
No,
one.
I don't.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lowe.
Commissioner Marve?
No questions, thank you.
So, you have discussion in your testimony on pages, I guess 4, 5, and 6 about the PJM interconnection process.
Right.
I take it you're fairly familiar with how that works?
Right.
And, I mean, there's been obviously some concerns raised about how that process either works or doesn't work.
Mm.
Do you have any concerns about the progress of this particular project through the PJM interconnection queue?
I would say one good thing is U.S. Wind already execute their ISA for Phase 1 project, so I don't have any concern with that. But for the Phase 2, 3, and 4, PJM hasn't completed their studies, So there's a possibility there's some kind of delay that will impact in terms of the COD, completion days, operation days will be delayed, impact because of the PGM studies.
Okay, so I've read, without going into a lot of detail, some, I guess, promises, commitments by PJM that they're fixing the process. I mean, do you have any thoughts as to whether or not this problem is gonna go away, or is this gonna continue to be an issue?
It's hard to say because they're moving from the first in, first out model to first ready, first serve structure. So we're supposed to kind of let this project that have more readiness to move forward along this process, and then removing those that are not just they're just speculative or there's no little chance of being built. So it's good to have this reform, but how things turns out, I do not have the answer.
Okay. Are you aware of how many other offshore wind projects are within the queue, or is it mainly? I mean, my perception is that most of the problem is caused by the solar projects, not the offshore wind
Right.
projects, because there's so many of them.
I don't have the exact number. It's based on an article or a presentation from PGM. There's about 300 projects in the transition cycle 1. It could include all the solar or offshore wind. So
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
welcome.
So, so I guess the last witness is the ICF consultant, but we got to do a couple of switching some people around. So why don't we take a break until noon, and then we'll reconvene and finish up with the ICF consultant. So.
afternoon, sir. We would call Maria Scheller to the stand.
Actually, do you have to enter your appearance, or?
I can't recall how we did it back in 2021. I can, however you'd like to do
Well,
it.
go ahead, so just so he knows, so.
Good afternoon, sir. Chuck McLean, I'm sponsoring the ICF witness and report.
Okay.
I think he's got it.
He's got it.
I know that one.
That's right, yeah.
Pardon me.
Go ahead.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm under penalties of perjury that the statements made in this matter today are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name, spell your first and last name, and give us your business address.
Maria Scheller, M-A-R-I-A, last name Scheller, S-C-H-E-L-L-E-R. I'm employed by ICF, and the business address is 1902 Reston Metro Plaza in Reston, Virginia, 20190.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ms. Scheller.
Good afternoon.
How are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you.
Ma'am, do you have in front of you a public version of a document entitled Evaluation of U.S. Wind Proposed Offshore Wind Project Application, dated October 9th, 2024, consisting of a title page, a table of contents, 34 pages of text, and 6 data responses?
Yes, I do.
And do you also have a version that contains confidential and proprietary information, ma'am?
I do.
All right. Mr. Chair, I'd like to have those documents marked as ICF 1 and 1C for identification, please, sir.
So marked.
Thank you. Ma'am, were these documents prepared by you or under your supervision?
They were.
And do you have any changes or corrections to the documents?
I have one on page 21 of the document. The last full paragraph, the second line from the end of that paragraph, the sentence begins, "the gas price." On that, the second from the last line, where it says consultant would results, beginning with the word results, so the phrase results of the ratepayer impact tests should be struck and replaced with result in ratepayer impact estimates that.
Actually, just, can you
I can read the whole sentence.
do it again, yeah.
Yes. So the phrase results of the ratepayer impact test should be struck and replaced with result in ratepayer impact estimates that. So that beginning at the beginning of that line, it would be inputting prices consistent with the forecast provided elsewhere by the consultant would result in ratepayer impact estimates that vary from those provided.
And is it fair to say that change would be the same in the confidential version?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Do you have any other changes, ma'am?
No, I do not.
Thank you. And the contents of the report, are they correct and true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, at this time, I'd like to move ICF 1 and 1C into the record, subject to cross-examination.
So admitted.
She's available for cross-examination, sir.
So, Sierra Club,
No questions, thank you.
Earth Justice,
No questions.
MEA, OPC.
Just a few. Good day, I guess, Ms. Scheller.
Hello.
I guess first, do you have you don't happen to have a copy of the public utilities article with you? I can give you one.
I do not.
So I'm going to 7704.1. So in 7704.1F,
I got the roll.
one triple I. I had it highlighted on there, but just so everybody else can get there. So triple I, and it has 1, 1A, 1B, 1C, 2, 2A, 2B. So this says that the commission may not approve a offshore wind project unless the in 1A the projected net rate impact does not exceed, et cetera, does not exceed $1.50 per month in 2012 dollars over the duration of the proposed OREC pricing schedule, correct?
Yes, it does.
And then sort of the same thing for the round 2 OREC ratepayer impact test.
Yes, it does.
And okay, so the proposed OREC pricing schedule here is scheduled to last 20 years, correct?
It is.
Okay, and then so ICF's analysis, in your analysis, the 20-year ratepayer impact test failed, correct?
The ratepayer impact test for residential did fail for the
for the 20-year.
For the 20-year period.
And then it's the 30-year that passed, correct?
Right. Technically, it's probably 23 years, but yes, that's right.
Sure. Yeah, thereabouts. So, in your actually, let me have another thing to hand out. So this is a printout from the ICF report workbooks. Do you recognize this?
Yes, it looks familiar.
Okay, so I'm not going to. I'm going to try. It's confidential. I'm going to try to avoid any of the. Using any of the. I would like to mark this as OPC Exhibit 3.
Doesn't work.
C and for 3C. Apologies. Confidential. So if you look at the first line here, the NPV rate impact, it shows the same value for the 23 and the 33 year analysis, right?
It does, yes.
So essentially, what you did in the 30-year analysis was take the rate impact, like the total net rate impact from the 20-year, and then divide it by, instead of over 20 years, over 30 years. Is that correct?
It's discounted over 30 years, but it is the same OREC schedule, so the values for those periods of the contract are the same.
Right. So in the 30 years, basically the first 20 years of the OREC pricing schedule term, like everything's the same, and then it just gets discounted over an additional 10 years.
Correct.
So in the 2025 analysis, there was sort of the 20-ish year analysis, and I guess U.S. Wind, you can tell me if this is confidential. What is the percent amount the test fails by? We can do the math here, I guess, if you want, but basically dividing the number, the MPV rate impact residential and the rate threshold. if you can, I could, find a calculator or something.
I don't think those numbers were, that specific number was confidential.
I'm not.
I'm not
If
sure,
we
but I'll
if
look
we
at my
divide
public version.
like, U.S. wind, the company knows that these numbers, or we can.
I mean,
pay
yes,
them.
these numbers are confidential, so,
It's over 20%.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. So essentially, it fails by over 20% in the 20-year, and then in the 30-year, it's just that the price effects from the 20-year are still applied to those same 20 years. It's just, and then basically spread out an additional 10 years, but you haven't you haven't changed the impact over those first 20 years, right?
The total value over the first 20 years remains the same. Spreading it out over 30 years reduces the impact, yes.
Okay. Nothing further.
Okay. U.S. Wind.
thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Scheller, thank you for being here today. I'd like to start a bit where we left off, but isn't it your testimony in this case that markets are uncertain, but that U.S. Wind's analysis had reasonable assumptions and was based on reasonable market assumptions and reasonable outcomes?
Yes, it was.
And if I may refer you to page 1, of your testimony, which is your executive summary. Is it your overall conclusion that U.S. Wind's, all of U.S. Wind's bids in this case pass the ratepayer test?
The conclusion I have here is that they passed the test, yes.
And would you please explain the basis for that conclusion?
Yes, the analysis that I base the conclusion on here is the 33-year test in what we were just looking at. The rationale for using that longer-term period, the period beyond the contract period, was based off of the life of the asset. It's often, very typical to extend the valuation of these very large infrastructure assets through a period that's more closely associated with their life than with the contract itself.
Was U.S. Wind's analysis consistent with a prior analysis that was approved in round 2 of this proceeding?
Yes, it was.
If you know, was a decay function such as that proposed by Mr. Chang used in any way in the round 2 proceeding?
I don't specifically recall. To the best of my recollection, it was not.
It was not. Okay.
To the best of my recollection.
Are you aware of a decay function such as the one used by Mr. Chang being used in any other offshore wind project proceeding of an OREC nature in any other state?
I'm not aware of anything like that.
Do you recall that Mr. Chang testified that U.S. Wind should reduce its price by approximately 14% to meet the ratepayer test?
Yes.
Do you know if Mr. Chang did any analysis of whether a wind project could be built in today's market at that price?
I'm not aware of his analysis.
Do you know if he considered capital costs or operational costs or financial costs when making that decision?
I'm not familiar with the analysis he made.
Have you had a chance to review Mr. Grabowski's rebuttal testimony?
I have not read his testimony.
Okay. Would it surprise you that Mr. Grabowski's view in this matter is that this project would not be viable and not be viable or economic at the price that Mr. Chang proposed.
It wouldn't not surprise me.
Thank you. No further questions.
Staff?
Staff has no questions for this witness. Thank you.
Any redirect?
No, sir.
Apologies, Your Honor. I'd also like to move OPC 3C into the record.
So admitted. Mr. Sussman?
Good afternoon, Ms. Scheller.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so following up from U.S. Wind Council's questions about the recommended adjustments. So you've not seen situations where decay was included in the analysis for OREX.
I can't say that I've reviewed every offshore wind application. I've been involved in the Massachusetts proceedings, and I have not seen it used there.
Okay. Would it make sense to include it, or do you have an opinion on whether decay analysis is something that should be included in an analysis for OREX?
The application of the decay analysis would be dependent on the approach that's taken for impact analysis. So the approach, for example, that ICF used is an engineering economics fundamentals-based modeling approach. It makes assumptions about what happens in the future, so that there's a decay function automatically built in of sorts.
So it almost becomes belt and suspenders. So you've already sort of looked to the impact, and so adding an additional decay percentage on that sort of ends up perhaps double counting.
Yes.
Okay. And then he also recommended adjustments for load growth and or adjustments for load growth assumptions and a phase-in of energy price impacts. Do you have any thoughts on those recommendations?
Well, fundamentally, the load and load growth expectations are uncertain. PJM produces a forecast through 2039, I believe is the end date currently, and extrapolating beyond that means that you're building assumptions of some form or another. And the bandwidth of uncertainty just becomes larger and larger, so it's reasonable to have a different opinion about load growth. Whether or not to be specific in addressing electrification demand or the uncertainty around data center or industrial load growth can certainly impact the...
So you don't have a crystal ball in your office. Okay, that's confirming that.
A wonderful way to say it, yes.
Okay, and then the phase-in, is that for the same reason that you can't sort of know long-term what the impact is going to be, and so...
Yeah, again, I think that is also associated with the methodology. If you're using a regression analysis and you're going to try and make adjustments, that the approach you might take for phasing or accommodating those values in might be different than what you would take with the more engineering economic fundamentals approach.
Okay, but in your approach, you did reflect the impact of bringing projects on, and okay.
Yes.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony this afternoon. As I'm just looking at, let me take the study here, I think. Report. So when we look at the various qualitative analyses, you've used a color coding. When you go through this, do you have you've done this? Or I should ask a question. Have you done this for other projects? On the East Coast.
I've done it for other offshore wind projects, and I've also been the independent evaluator for other types of resources as well, generation technologies.
Okay, but just literally comparing, this project that's being proposed with, I guess, projects that have already been built and are in proposal. Does this quantitative analysis look in line with what you saw for other projects?
You know, the rubrics, I would say, are very similar, although they're not, you know, necessarily a one-to-one match.
Not the one-to-one match, but there's not. Is there anything here that you would advise us to say anything's kind of out of the ordinary or different than should be of concern to us?
No, I would not.
All right, and then within the quantitative analysis that we've discussed, does this project seem in line with projects that you would expect to be proposed today? Does it seem anything of concern we should have as in Maryland for our ratepayers to be concerned about?
I think this offshore wind project is reflective of the current market conditions for offshore wind.
Okay, great. All right, I think that's the only questions I have. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Barve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, all my questions were asked, but I will ask you this in a more theoretical sense. Typically, when I've seen regression analysis done, you want to get as much data in the past in order to have your numbers be as stable as possible. But let me ask this question. Given that this is a completely newish industry and circumstances are changing quite a lot, the danger of going 5 years or 6 years or 7 years in the past is that you may start to incorporate really stale and inappropriate data, because what happened 5 or 6 years ago may be in no way relevant to what's going to happen in the future. So I suppose what I'm calling into question is we have to be very careful with respect to the use of regression, don't we?
I would agree with that, and I think for the reasons that you noted, as well as, or maybe just expanding on it, the same regression formula. So when you use a regression, often you're using a goodness of fit, and you're testing the statistical value of the results against the original equation, the original data.
Right.
If you were to take in a regression developed 3-4 years ago and apply that same equation to new data, it may no longer be statistically valid. So there's definitely a careful review required with regression analyses, both of the actual formula as well as the parameters within it and the time period. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and the other question I'd like to bring up, because this has come up yesterday and a little bit today as well, is the whole disagreement over whether the analysis should be done over 23 years or 33 years. And forgive me for putting words in the mouth of the People's Council, but I believe their argument would be that, well, the analysis should be over the period of the contract because that's the only thing that is relevant right now. So I wonder if you have a rebuttal to that.
The type of asset, this is a very significant infrastructure asset that is a long-lived asset. It will carry on beyond the time period of the contract, and it will continue to provide benefits to the market and serve the, in service as a generation facility. It's very often the case in analyses that I've done supporting generation projects or transmission projects of the same size infrastructure that the use of lifetime is the relevant metric. And in part, it's because these are very risky assets. So contracts are often not sufficient to fully cover the expected value of the projects.
You may not know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. I mean, these projects strike me as having not gigantic profit margins to them. They strike me as being projects that are very sensitive to sudden increase in, factors like the price of steel and the price of energy for the construction phase. Am I basically getting that correct?
Yeah, they are very sensitive to market conditions, to vessel availability. That you can, I'm sure, list out a very long list of potential contingencies for these projects.
And my final question, and I'm not suggesting that that's going to happen, this is going to happen in this instance, but are you familiar with instances where a construction project of this kind for offshore wind has been interrupted unexpectedly due to regulatory or legal challenges even after the permits have been implemented?
Yeah, I think the type of industry that we're in, the nascent stage of this industry, is it is highly subject to those, and there have been projects that impacted after approvals.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So as a follow-up to some of Commissioner Barbie's questions, do we know how long these things are going to last once they're constructed?
I believe that the lifetime for the U.S. wind facility is proposed at 35 years.
And while you said that, they're very sensitive to the price of steel when it goes to construction and things like that, but once they're constructed and operating, they're not invulnerable, but more or less, they're not really affected by pretty much anything, right?
Correct. There's ongoing operation and maintenance
Right.
costs, obviously, but the price of steel will no
Right.
longer impact
Yeah,
it.
and the fact they don't buy fuel since they,
Correct.
So, last question I have is, I understand this difference between 23 years and 33 years, the 10-year difference, but I guess my question is, why 23 years initially? Why not 20 years?
It reflected the two phases of the project, so the start date of January 29 and January 31. So each of them have a 20-year period. This was just the combination of those two contract periods.
Okay, and your bottom line is that this longer time frame is a legitimate measure for the ratepayer impact test because of the fact that this thing's going to be operating for a significantly long period of time.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement.
Okay, thank you very much. So I guess the only thing we have left is briefs that are going to be filed in this proceeding, correct? So, all right, with that, we're adjourned.